Hey there, eighth grade friends. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today for How Can I? Integrating Disciplines, your newest webinar in your eighth grade Georgia Studies webinar series. I'm Heather Cootie, your virtual specialist. I'm supported by the incredible team at the Georgia DOE. So today we're going to begin talking about integrating disciplines. When I say integrating disciplines, gang, I'm talking about taking it a step further than that four hat or that disciplinary thinking and really specifically beginning the conversation about how can we integrate the disciplines of history and economics and geography and civics and government. And the reason I say begin the conversation is because this is not a one and done. Today, we're going to begin our conversation about calling out really and discussing who's getting the most love and most attention in terms of standards in our classrooms. We're going to pick some specific standards and mix them up, and then we're going to wrap up, as always, with ways that you can follow along for more tips and resources. So traditionally, history standards receive the most attention in social studies instruction. And please note that I say social studies instruction, not just eighth grade, because in conversations with teachers from, I would argue, K through 12, they'll all say the same thing. And if you look at historically data from our tested areas, you're going to see that those secondary disciplines or those other disciplines in comparison to history typically are scoring lower, at least in the K-8 range. And when I say historically, I know that currently we are only tested in social studies in eighth grade, so no pressure for us, right? So speaking of that, let's take a look at the Georgia milestone breakdown for eighth grade. So maybe history is getting the most love, but probably with good reason. You'll see that 50% of the end of course test in Georgia studies is made up of questions related to our history standards, with civics and government coming in second with 20%, and economics and geography at 15% each. So, understandably, when teachers are kind of deciding who's going to get the most attention, what is the majority of my time going to be dedicated towards, they're looking at those history standards, which certainly outnumber the others. But let's take a look at those civics standards specifically. And what I want to do is begin by looking at Civics and Government Standard 2, analyzing the role of the legislative branch in Georgia. Look, I get it. It is really hard sometimes to make those civic standards as engaging as some of our history standards. For a lot of students, this is the first time that they're closely analyzing or looking at the legislative branch in Georgia or really getting into state government. We're dealing with a population that they cannot engage in government the way that we can as adults. They don't vote. They're probably not that interested in the news just yet. So the relevance is not there for them. Whereas with history, they have the opportunity, because sort of our information spirals, to go deeper and deeper and learn more about things that they have been learning about, for years. But I want to talk about how we can deliberately and intentionally take something like our civic standards and mix and mash them up with our history standards. So if we're taking one of our civic standards, in this case, in this instance, I want to look at the role of the legislative branch, specifically the qualifications for members of our Georgia lawmaking body, the General Assembly. Okay, now let's take a look at our history standards. So, in looking at H6 in Reconstruction, analyzing the impact of Reconstruction, students have the opportunity to examine reasons for and the effects of the removal of African American or Black legislatures from the Georgia General Assembly during Reconstruction. So, if I were to put these two side by side, then there are some commonalities that I see. Even if all I do is look at the words Georgia General Assembly and legislators in both of those standards. So I feel like there is an opportunity for us to combine them. Now, traditionally or typically, I'm going to go back for a moment. We are teaching our civic standards in isolation. Now, I know that when I was teaching eighth grade, that I would specifically get into our civic standards. It was usually sometime before that December holiday break, because I would always introduce government right after the establishment of the government with Revolutionary War. For many other teachers, your curriculum map may have you teaching this closer to the end of the year, but again, in isolation. Reconstruction, on the other hand, some of you may have already gotten to, some of you may be coming up on it. If you have not yet gotten to it, then hopefully this is going to be something that you can implement right away. If you have already done it, Give this a whirl when it comes closer to your doing your review before the Georgia milestone. So, what if instead of teaching these in isolation, what could it look like if these two standards were taught together? And it can be done even if one of these standards has already been addressed. So, for example, if you've already taught that Reconstruction standard but haven't gotten to the civics, you can still do what I am proposing. Consider the role of saturation here and this idea of the students are only going to benefit the more you expose them to the content and introduce it in different ways. Ultimately, we as educators and facilitators want to make deliberate connections between the disciplines to help students increase that disciplinary thinking. It's very rarely going to happen organically. So we need to be able to show them that all of these are married together, all of these serve a purpose. So, if we're taking a look at Civics and Government Standard 2, asking the big question of what are the qualifications for the members of the Georgia General Assembly? Moving on to the Reconstruction Standard, why were African American or Black legislators removed from the Georgia General Assembly during Reconstruction? But here's the bigger question, folks. How are they related? Are they related? So here's what I would propose. Okay, have your students investigate and question. So, for example, focusing specifically on CG2, have the students identify those qualifications for the members of the Georgia General Assembly. So, that should also include research of the history of these requirements, meaning, have the requirements changed? If we're going to be specifically situating it in this case in the Reconstruction era, what were the qualifications for members of the Georgia General Assembly at that time? What are they now? Were they the same? So, with all of those qualifications and that historical research done, now students can research the African American or Black legislators, that were removed from the Georgia General Assembly during Reconstruction, as well as the reasons that were given at the time for their removal. Match the information up. Does it align? Is it an issue of qualifications? How does it all check out? You can even ask the students to get creative by having them generate a job posting and then completing an application on behalf of the removed members to really kind of get to the heart of, does it stick? Does the reason that was given for the removal of the African American or Black legislators in the time of Reconstruction, um, does it align with their with their qualifications or with the reasons that were given? So lots of fun things that you can do with that. Something that also they can also do is prepare to basically run in the first place. So there's a fun way to extend the learning because students can visit georgia.gov and learn the steps that are actually needed to run for public office. So as a reminder, if you guys are trying to click on the screen right now, not anything you can do during a video, but if you are a member of our Georgia DOE community, I upload all of our presentations as PDFs where you will notice that this is specifically hyperlinked. So you can go there and click on it and take a look at it. And so the students can sort of see what are the key steps and does the figure that I am assuming, can they meet those? What does that look like? Something else that you can also do is you can see what is happening specifically under the gold dome. So again, sometimes it's not fun or it can be difficult to try to bring the Georgia General Assembly or the information about the legislature to life, but you can actually in real time click and see what is happening. So if you make those deliberate connections between here is what we've learned about in history, but what is the Georgia General Assembly? What is the responsibility of those members? What are the qualifications to do that? What does it take to be removed? And then that really gets into a deeper historical conversation. And now that they sort of are hooked and you've integrated that history and that civics and government disciplinary thinking, now perhaps they might be a little bit more interested to go on and click and see, well, what is being discussed and what has that looked like over time? So just different ways that you can extend that learning beyond, here's the facts, boys and girls. I would love to hear from you. I would love, especially if any of you have not yet gotten to Reconstruction and have a chance to teach all of this. So, ways that you can sort of share and get in touch, or even if you want to just follow along for some more information, are first and foremost to make sure that you are a member of our Georgia DOE community. And also, if you are on social media on any of these outlets, you can follow along on Instagram, on Facebook. Don't forget on Facebook, we have a Georgia DOE social studies. General page, but we also have one specific for Georgia 8th grade social studies. And that's a really great opportunity to connect with your peers from around the state who are consistently sharing their great ideas, but also seeking your input and help to get some of those great ideas. And then finally on Twitter at Georgia DOE _social studies. So I know how valuable your time is. Thank you so much for taking um, a couple of minutes to watch this with us, and I look forward to continuing to learn with you in our next webinar.